A silent rider buys a mother and child, unaware that she would heal his heart. I ain't sayin' nothin'. Just don't send me back. The wind tore through the barren plain, dry and merciless. It was a constant presence at Caleb's homestead, a scouring sound that stripped the silence down to its rawest form. He lived inside that sound, inside a quiet so profound it had its own weight. For 2 years, the only reply to his thoughts had been the creak of floorboards under his solitary weight or the distant howl of a coyote speaking to the slate evening sky. His hands, weathered and calloused, knew the language of wood and leather, of mending fences and splitting logs deep into the night, as if he could split his own guilt into manageable pieces. He was a man worn down by a grief so total it had become his very architecture. Up on the small hill overlooking the cabin, 2 simple wooden crosses stood against the dusty vastness. They marked the place where his world had ended, where a fever had stolen his wife, Sarah, and their infant daughter in the space of 1 bitter week. Since then, his life had been a routine of endurance, his heart a boarded-up place. The letter he'd sent months ago, addressed to a mail-order bride agency in a town he'd never see, was an act not of hope, but of desperation against the crushing void. He hadn't asked for love. He had asked for a presence, any presence, to prove he was still alive. Now the day had come, and the dust cloud on the horizon signaled the arrival of his mistake. He stood on the porch, his shoulders weary, his jaw set. He expected nothing. He felt nothing. It was safer that way. The wagon rattled to a stop, the metal clinking on tin and the driver's gruff voice cutting through the wind. Caleb's gaze was fixed on the covered back, waiting for the woman whose photograph he carried in his pocket. A small, timid-looking girl with pale hair and frightened eyes. The driver, a man with a mean-spirited squint, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Got your delivery, mister," he nodded toward the wagon. "Paid in full, as agreed." Caleb gave a short, deliberate nod, his hand going to the small pouch of coins at his belt. He didn't want talk. He wanted the transaction finished, the driver gone, the awful silence of his life to resume, albeit with one more shadow in it. The canvas flap was pushed aside, and a figure began to descend. He froze. This was not the woman from the photograph. Not even close. The woman who stepped onto the dry earth was tall, nearly his own height, with shoulders as broad as a man's. Her face was plain, etched with exhaustion, but it held a solid, earthy strength that seemed to defy the wind itself. She was not delicate. She was massive, a bulwark of a woman who looked as if she had personally shouldered every hardship the world had to offer. Behind her skirts, a small boy of about 5, all tired eyes and clinging hands, peeked out at the dusty world. The woman's gaze met Caleb's. There was no plea in it, only a deep, abiding weariness and a flicker of raw, defiant pride. She was a survivor, and it was written in every line on her face. Caleb looked from her to the smirking driver, then back to the worn-down woman and the child. He felt a familiar, cold hollowness in his chest, the echo of another loss, another helpless figure he couldn't save. The driver chuckled. "Bit more than you bargained for, eh? She's a worker, though." Strong as an ox, the woman flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. In that instant, something shifted in Caleb. It was an impulsive, protective instinct he thought long dead. He saw not a stranger, but the embodiment of every soul the world tried to break. He acted against his nature, against the numb caution that had been his only shield. He stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm, cutting off the driver's next words. "She's with me." He dropped the coins into the man's waiting hand without looking at him. He looked only at her. He didn't know it yet, but his first true home was right in front of him. The first days were an exercise in shared space and profound separation. Martha. He had learned her name from the single, terse word she offered when he gestured toward the cabin, and her son, Samuel, occupied the small spare room as if they were ghosts. Their presence was marked only by the faintest sounds. The soft brush of a hand against the wooden door, a muffled cough in the night, quiet footsteps in the dust that seemed to apologize for their own existence. He showed her the well, the woodpile, the stove. He didn't use many words. He didn't have them anymore. She simply nodded, her eyes taking everything in with an alert, guarded stillness. They lived in a world of unspoken rules. He would rise before the pale winter sun, stoke the fire, and head out to the barn. When he returned for his midday meal, a tin cup of coffee and a plate of food would be waiting on the table, still warm. She and the boy ate after he was finished, their meal a quiet, unobtrusive affair at the other end of the long wooden table. They moved around each other like planets in different orbits, their paths crossing in the kitchen or the yard but never truly connecting. The silence in the cabin was different now. It was no longer empty. It was occupied, filled with a tense, breathing quiet, with the weight of things unsaid, with the palpable presence of her distrust and his caution. He watched her from a distance. She was not broken, he realized, but concealed. Her hands, though chapped and rough, were endlessly capable. She mended his torn shirt with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She scoured the old pots until they shone. She moved with a deliberate, weary grace, a woman who knew that survival was a litany of small, essential tasks. He chopped wood deep into the night, the rhythmic thud of the axe a conversation with his own rigid heart. He was splitting his guilt into pieces, trying to make sense of the woman who was a constant, silent reproach to his solitude. She was a reminder of a world he had tried to shut out, a world of need, of vulnerability, of connection. He did not want it. He did not know what to do with it. He remained silent. Then, "If you want to stay." He had left the sentence unfinished one evening, his back to her as he stared into the fire. She made no reply, but the next morning, the scent of fresh bread filled the cabin for the first time in 2 years. She stayed. He began to notice the small details of their poverty. The way Samuel's worn-down shoes were so thin Caleb could see the shape of his toes pressing against the leather. The way Martha would unobtrusively give the boy the larger portion of her own food, her own hunger a quiet maternal secret. These observations settled in him like stones. He was a man accustomed to fixing what was broken, a fence post, a harness, a leaky roof. The raw, human brokenness in front of him was a more complicated matter. It required a language he had forgotten how to speak. So he acted in silence. One day, on a necessary trip to the small, dusty town for flour and salt, he stopped in front of the general store. In the window was a pair of sturdy boy's shoes. He stood there for a long time, his hand on the door, a war raging within him. To offer help was to admit he saw their need. It was a form of intimacy, a breach of the careful distance they maintained. He bought the shoes. Back at the homestead, he waited until she and the boy were in their room for the night. He placed the new shoes on the floor by the front door, right next to Samuel's tattered ones. He said nothing about them the next morning. When he came in from the barn, the old shoes were gone, and Samuel was sitting by the stove, his feet tucked awkwardly beneath him as if hiding the gift. Martha was kneading dough at the table, her back ramrod straight. She didn't look at him, but he saw the faintest trembling in her powerful shoulders. A week later, he spent the evening carving a piece of scrap pine. His hands, usually occupied with rough, practical tasks, moved with an unpracticed tenderness. He shaped the wood into a small, simple horse, sanding it smooth with a piece of leather until it felt warm to the touch. That night, he crept into the main room and placed the wooden horse on the edge of the small cot where Samuel slept. The next day, the boy clutched the toy in his hand, a silent, constant companion. Martha watched him, her expression guarded. She still didn't speak of the gifts. But when Caleb sat down to eat, his tin cup was filled to the brim with steaming coffee, and a second biscuit sat on his plate. It was a fragile response, a quiet acknowledgement. Hope, he realized, could be a terrifying thing to awaken. A blizzard descended without warning, a swirling fury of white that erased the world. The biting wind howled around the small cabin, rattling the wooden door and forcing frost into the cracks of the window panes. The vast, empty plains vanished, and their universe shrank to the four walls of the house, trapping the three of them in an enforced closeness. For 2 days, they existed in the smoky lamplight, the storm's roar a constant companion. On the third morning, the storm sound was joined by another, a small, weak cough from the spare room. By midday, Samuel was burning with fever. Caleb watched as Martha became a statue of rigid fear. She bathed the boy's forehead with a damp cloth, her large hands moving with a desperate, gentle touch. She whispered things to him too soft for Caleb to hear. He saw the raw terror in her eyes, the same terror he remembered seeing in his own reflection in the window 2 winters ago. The past rose up to choke him. He saw Sarah, her face pale with fever, her breathing shallow. He felt the cold weight of his infant daughter in his arms. He had been helpless then, a bystander to a tragedy he could not stop. He couldn't stand by again. That evening, he walked over to where Martha knelt by the cot. She looked up, her face a mask of overtired exhaustion. "Let me," he said. The words felt rough in his throat, and used. She shook her head, a stubborn, protective gesture. "You need to rest," he insisted, his voice low but firm. "I'll watch him." He saw her internal struggle, the fierce instinct to never let go warring with the profound weariness in her bones. She finally, reluctantly, nodded. She retreated to a chair by the stove, but she didn't sleep. She just watched, her hands clenched in her lap. Caleb took her place. He brewed a bitter tea from herbs he kept for the livestock, his movements calm and deliberate. He coaxed the warm liquid past the boy's dry lips. He felt Samuel's forehead, the heat a familiar, dreaded enemy. Throughout the long night, they kept the vigil together, 2 silent figures bound by a shared fear in the flickering light. He was no longer just the man whose house she occupied. She was no longer just the stranger he had taken in. In the fight for the child's life, they became something else. Toward dawn, the boy's breathing softened. The trembling stopped. Caleb placed a hand on his forehead. The fire was gone. It had broken. He looked over at Martha. Her face was illuminated by the pale morning light filtering through the window, and he saw a single tear trace a path through the dust on her cheek. It was a tear of relief, a tear of gratitude. The blizzard passed, leaving behind a world of stunning, silent white. Their supplies were dangerously low, and a trip to town was unavoidable. The thought of it settled like a stone in Caleb's gut. To go alone felt like a betrayal of the fragile truce forged during the storm. To go together felt like a declaration, an exposure he wasn't ready for. He loaded the wagon in silence, and when he turned, she was standing by the door, bundled in her worn coat, with Samuel holding tightly to her hand. She had made the decision for them. The journey was quiet, the only sound the crunch of the wagon wheels on the packed snow. In town, the stares began immediately. Heads turned. People whispered behind their hands. Caleb felt the familiar urge to retreat, to pull the shell of his isolation back around him, but Martha's presence beside him made that impossible. Her head was held high, though he could see the tension in the set of her broad shoulders. Inside the general store, the air was thick with smoke and judgment. As Caleb was getting his supplies weighed, a man stepped forward. It was Henderson, the freight agent who had arranged the whole sordid transaction, a man whose cruelty was a local pastime. "Well, look what the blizzard blew in," Henderson sneered, his eyes raking over Martha with open contempt. "That the prize you paid for, Caleb? Looks like you got more workhorse than woman." The laughter of the other men was a sharp, ugly sound. Martha flinched as if struck. She lowered her gaze, her body becoming a shield as she pulled her son closer, trying to hide him from the hateful words. The child clung to her, his face buried in her skirts. Caleb saw her dignity being stripped away, her quiet strength crumbling under the weight of public humiliation. Everything in him went still. The numbness that had been his companion for 2 years burned away, replaced by a cold, protective rage. He put down the sack of flour. He stepped forward, placing himself between Martha and the mocking crowd. He wasn't a large man, but his presence suddenly filled the room. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the laughter like a blade. "She's with me." He looked directly at Henderson, his eyes as hard as frozen earth. He paused, letting the words settle. Then he added, his voice ringing with a conviction that startled even himself. Not bought. Chosen. The store fell into a dead silence. The men shuffled their feet, their smirks gone. Henderson swallowed, his bravado vanishing under Caleb's unwavering stare. Caleb turned his back on them, paid for his goods, and took Martha's arm. He led her and Samuel out of the store and into the cold, clean air. As they climbed back into the wagon, he saw that her face was wet with tears. But when she looked at him, her eyes held something new. It was a fragile, trembling trust. He had stayed. That evening, the silence on the porch felt different. It was no longer a void, but a space waiting to be filled. The biting wind had softened to a whisper, carrying the scent of pine and melting snow. They sat in the growing dusk, he on the top step, she in the old wooden chair, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. For a long time, neither spoke. Then her voice came, as soft and unsteady as the first spring thaw. "My husband, Jacob, he was a good man," she began, her gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. "But he took sick. When he died, his brother said I was a burden. Said a woman my size was too much to feed." She swallowed, a raw, painful sound. "He took the farm. He took everything. He sent us away." She told him of the agency, a lie concocted to get rid of her and the boy, of being passed from one callous hand to another until she ended up on that wagon, expecting nothing but rejection. She spoke of a life where her strength had always been seen as a flaw, her solid frame a source of mockery. She had made herself quiet and unobtrusive because it was the only way to survive. She had concealed herself. Caleb listened. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded, absorbing the weight of her story, recognizing the familiar shape of loss and injustice. When her voice trailed off into the slate evening sky, the silence returned, but now it was a shared space of understanding. He cleared his throat. "Up on that hill," he said, his own voice rusty with disuse. "That's Sarah, my wife." He told her about the fever, about holding his baby daughter as her life slipped away, a thing so small and perfect he couldn't protect it. He spoke of the guilt that had hollowed him out, the feeling that he had failed them, that his love hadn't been enough to keep them safe. It was a confession he had never made to anyone, not even himself. The words were stones he had carried alone for 2 years, and now he was laying them down, one by one, on the porch between them. As he fell silent, staring at the 2 crosses that were now just faint silhouettes against the stars, he felt a gentle pressure on his arm. He looked down. Her hand was resting there, her touch hesitant but firm. It wasn't a gesture of pity, but of recognition, a quiet declaration. "You are not alone anymore." He did not pull away. He breathed in the frosty air, and for the first time it didn't feel like it was stinging his skin. Felt like a clean, new beginning. Spring arrived not as a sudden burst, but as a slow, deliberate unfolding. The cracking ice on the creek gave way to a gentle murmur. The dusty sun grew warmer, coaxing tentative green shoots from the dark, rich earth. The homestead, once a bastion of silence and solitary routine, began to change with the season. A new sound joined the wind and the creak of wood. The sound of Samuel's laughter as he chased a chicken across the yard. The small wooden horse still clutched in his hand. Martha, with a quiet determination, tilled a small patch of ground near the cabin. She planted seeds for vegetables, her powerful hands gentle as they worked the soil. The garden was an act of faith, a promise of a future, of putting down roots in this place that was slowly, cautiously, becoming a home. Caleb found himself watching her, a growing warmth spreading through his chest. He saw not a burden but a partner. He began to teach Samuel how to whittle, his own large, calloused hand guiding the boy's small one. He carved a tiny bird, then a dog, his old skill returning with a new purpose. They worked together now, Caleb and Martha, falling into a natural rhythm. He would repair the barn roof while she mended the clothes. She would help him haul water from the well, her strength a reliable, welcome presence. They spoke more, their conversations still brief and practical, but the spaces between the words were no longer filled with tension. The silence had become comfortable and easy shared language. It was the quiet of two people who understood each other without needing to explain. One afternoon, he came back from mending a fence on the far side of the property. He saw her sitting on the porch steps, showing Samuel how to braid blades of grass together. The late afternoon sun caught the lines of her face, and he saw not a plain, worn-down woman, but a profound and dignified beauty. He saw strength. He saw resilience. He saw home. Their homestead was thriving, no longer a place of mere survival, but of living. The winter had passed, taking with it the worst of the frost, both outside and within their hearts. Some things are not built with a hammer and nails. A home, a true home, is sometimes built from the quietest materials. A shared glance, a second biscuit left on a plate, a hand placed gently on an arm in the twilight. It is built in the spaces between words, in the patient endurance of a long winter and the shared relief of a fever breaking at dawn. From dust and silence grew a home. From closed hearts, a family. Love is not always a loud declaration. More often, it grows where no one is looking, in the fertile ground of mutual respect and quiet kindness. It is the steady warmth of a fire on a cold night, the reliable presence of another person who sees the strength you've tried to conceal and calls it a virtue. It is the courage to step in front of someone to shield them from the cruelty of the world, to say with your actions what your mouth cannot yet form. You are worthy of dignity. You are worthy of protection. You are chosen. Caleb did not seek a savior, and Martha did not seek a hero. They were two exhausted souls who had stopped expecting anything from the world. And in that empty space, they found in each other a quiet harbor, a place to finally set down the heavy burdens they had carried for so long. Theirs was a love story written not in letters or poems, but in the daily rhythm of work, in the planting of a garden, in the carving of a small wooden toy. It was an honest, deliberate thing, as solid and earthy as the ground beneath their feet. Caleb sat on the porch, the evening air cool and smelling of damp earth. In his hands was his latest project, a small rocking chair, perfectly sized for a 5-year-old boy. He ran his hand over the smooth, curved wood of the armrest, the last piece he needed to finish. He had been working on it for weeks, a secret gift he poured his quiet attention into after the day's work was done. He heard the cabin door creak open behind him. It was Martha. She came out holding a folded blanket and draped it gently around his shoulders against the evening chill. She didn't say a word, just stood beside him, watching his hands work. The window of the main room was open behind them, and the warm, smoky lamplight spilled out onto the porch, a beacon of warmth in the vast, dark plains. A home. He looked up from his carving, his gaze meeting hers. In her eyes he saw no fear, no suspicion. He saw only a calm, steady light, a reflection of the lamp burning inside. All the coldness, all the numbness that had encased his heart for 2 long years, was gone. He felt a simple, profound truth settle over him. This was his life now. This was his family. He set the rocker down. "Stay here," he said. His voice was quiet, not a question, not a plea, but a statement of fact, as solid as the foundation of the house. A slow, gentle smile touched Martha's lips, a real smile that finally, truly reached her tired eyes, making them shine. She nodded. She stayed. From dust and silence grew a home. From closed hearts, a family. This story is a testament to the quiet strength of the human spirit, a reminder that redemption and love can be found in the most unexpected places, not with a thunderous clash, but with the gentle, persistent rhythm of two people learning to trust again. It is a story about how the deepest connections are often forged without words, built on small acts of kindness that mend the soul. If the story touched you, like warm light in a cold night, then carry it with you. Remember that dignity is a shelter we can build for one another, and that even the most silent heart has a story worth hearing. The greatest strength is often found in the courage to be gentle, and the truest home is a place where you are seen, chosen, and safe. Subscribe to our channel for more stories full of silence, courage, and genuine closeness. And tell us what moved you the most. We'll see you again, where silence means home.